Have you ever noticed how very literal kids can be about everything? And sometimes they don't understand when they take literal, too far. Like, I remember a day in school where they gathered us all together and they had this big presentation telling us to never drink and drive. They really hammered that home. They said it was illegal and dangerous, and so I got it, right? So a couple of months after that, one morning, I was in the car with my mom, and we were driving to school when I saw her grab a cup out of her cup holder. It was coffee, right? And she was taking a sip, and I was in the back seat freaking out. I was like, Mom, they told us you can't do that. You can't drink and drive. And then there's that rule. Don't talk to strangers, right? Well, what are you supposed to do when you're lost? Luckily, the time I did get lost, I was crying so loudly that it did not take long for my parents to find me. Most rules are given to us with the best of intentions to protect us and help us live a good life. But sometimes we take those rules a little too far, a little too literally. And what was meant as a gift of freedom becomes a law that binds us. And then what happens is we get so wrapped up in judgment, and everything becomes about how well we obey the rules and who's not obeying them. And we give ourselves this very important role of being the judge and the one to police how well everyone else is keeping the rules. And when we do this all in the name of religion, it seems to hold more weight and authority, as if the judgment is coming from God and not just us humans. Us humans who really like to maintain order and control and cling to rituals and traditions and habits, because it's easier for us to try to fix external problems than it is to deal with something that might be internal. Do you all remember the story of Footloose? How many of you have seen that? Handful of you. Well, in that story, in the movie, there's a minister, and his son had died in a car crash coming home from a night of dancing. And so the minister decides what he's going to do to prevent this from ever happening again is to ban rock and roll music and dancing in the entire town of Beaumont. Because it was easier for him to make the problem about dancing than it was to deal with his own grief and loss. But then Kevin Bacon comes along. He comes to town and he shakes things up and he stands before the minister and he says, dancing is not a crime. And he opens up the Bible and he points to the book of Samuel where David is leaping and dancing in front of the Lord. And it is this great reminder to us all that God doesn't label some music good and other music bad and some dancing good and other dancing bad. God's judgment is not as black and white as ours can be. Well, today's reading is basically the Pharisees' version of Footloose. Except instead of dancing, what they're really worried about is hand washing. And we all know hand washing is a good thing. This rule started out with the best of intentions. Hand washing keeps people safe from germs and keeps a healthy community. But there were these strict practices in place, not about cleanliness, but they made it into ritual cleanliness and being pure before God. So after a while, these rules about hand washing and other things became more about following the rule for the rule's sake than the intention behind the rule in the first place. And these religious people were more interested in keeping tabs on everyone else's behavior than they were about their own heart. So Jesus calls them out on it. He says the religious people are more worried about hand washing than theft, murder, adultery, deceit, slander, envy. If that list sounds familiar to you, it's basically the 10 Commandments. And we still do versions of this today, right? We worry about the purity of others instead of our own. We get more worked up about how other people are dancing than we do at our own objectification of bodies and lust. We worry about other people's genders and who they love and what choices they are making with their life instead of wondering why any of that matters to us in the first place. We are so worried about what's happening out there when we really should be worried about what's happening in here. As Jesus says, it is not other people, their behavior, that's going to defile us. It's not what they do or what we see or what we hear or anything that is done to us that makes us sinful. What defiles us comes from within, from our own heart. We are responsible for our own behavior. We're responsible for the words that we say and how we choose to treat others. But it is so much easier to make it about them, isn't it? It is easier to focus on changing them than it is to try to change ourselves. It is easier to make them the problem. And it is easier and more comfortable to cling to what we've always known and the way they've always been done than it is to try and open our hearts to God's way of love and compassion and justice and peace. The word Jesus uses here to describe this is hypocrisy. And in ancient Greek, the word hypocrite actually used to describe an actor. Someone who is playing a part wearing a mask. And in this case, hypocrites are putting on this mask of righteousness, pretending that there's no fault within them, and they're judging everyone else, when really behind the mask, they are just as guilty as the rest. And we all do this to some degree. Sometimes we are aware of when we do it, and sometimes we've got these blind spots, and we need other people to point them out. For example, when I was in college, I had this really tight group of friends. We did everything together, but I noticed that the closer we got, it became like this inside group, and it was us and it was them, right? And when I noticed this, the closer that we got is we started talking about them when they weren't around. And there was this gossiping and complaining about them that I wasn't comfortable with, and it started really wearing on me. But I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to lose these friends, and I really struggled with what to do about this. So what I did was I went to another friend of mine who wasn't part of that group, and I started laying it on her and telling her all the things that these friends were doing. You probably see the irony in this, right? I was doing the exact same thing I was mad at my friends for doing. But it is so much easier to get mad at other people for behaving a certain way than facing the own ugliness inside us, our own insecurities and shortcomings. And I wonder what version of this you are experiencing in your life right now. Who's someone you might be judging? Is there a rule or a behavior you are upset because someone is breaking it? Some tradition that they are disregarding, or maybe there's just an expectation you have that is not being met. Maybe someone's drinking coffee while they're driving, or they are dancing, or not washing their hands before dinner, or they're gossiping. Whatever that is, it is easy to focus on what the problem out there is, isn't it? On the person who is ignoring the rule, the person who doesn't value or follow your tradition. But let's try to make a shift together this morning. Instead of focusing on them, let's examine what's in our own heart. What if it's not about them? What if this is about you instead? What's going on in your heart? What are you afraid of losing? What are they threatening in you? And what if instead we all tried trusting in God's mercy? What if Jesus is telling you that that rule or tradition or expectation, that judgment you are so worried about right now, it is binding you up? And Jesus is here to free you from it. He's already freed you from it. His death on the cross set you free from whatever is binding you up. That rule or tradition or plan, whatever it is, you are set free. Jesus has set you free, and so whatever you are afraid of losing, you will find it flows from the fountain of God's grace. Whether that is love or acceptance or belonging or worth or whatever it is that you want to hold on to, it comes to you from Jesus. It doesn't come from rules or other people. And while it might not seem like good news to us that Jesus is loosening our hold on our judgments and rules and traditions that we are working so hard to hold on to, while that may not seem like good news for us, it is good news for others. And that is good news for us all. Because God's justice is more kind than ours. God's judgment is more merciful than our own. God's rules are more gracious, more freeing. And it turns out, after all, we are free to safely drink coffee while we drive. Thanks be to God.